Okay, so let's begin. Assignment 3 will be available this evening, and as usual, you have to submit it by 9:30 p.m. today. Um, so the last time we were looking at properties of matrix norms. This is a long chapter in the textbook, so we will be discussing this for a couple of more classes. So specifically, we discussed L1, L2, and L infinity norm, and these are three norms that are different from um, um, the L1, L2, and L infinity norm that we are going to define in this class. These are basically vector matrix versions of vector norms. And in particular, the L1 norm is the sum of the magnitudes of all the entries of the matrix, and that is indeed a matrix norm. The L2 norm we defined in the previous class is the sum of the squares of the entries of the matrix to the power half, and that's also known as the Frobenius norm. And the L infinity norm, if you do n times the maximum magnitude entry of all the entries, the largest magnitude entry among all the entries of the matrix, then that is what we call the L infinity norm, and that is also a matrix norm. But these are three different norms compared to what we are going to consider in this class. So we discussed about induced norms, and the point is that you can start with any vector norm, and this could be any vector norm, and then if you define the matrix norm to be the maximum value that norm of ax. So ax is a vector here, so you're taking the vector norm of ax and you look at the largest value this can take over all x, such that for the same norm of x equals 1, now that quantity, of course, it's non-negative, and it turns out, in fact, we stated and proved the theorem to that effect. It turns out that this is a matrix norm. And so these are called induced norms because there is a vector norm, underlying vector norm, that is inducing a matrix norm. And we started discussing about examples of induced norms. And today we will continue and discuss one or two more examples of such induced norms, and then move on to discussing about the spectral radius and its properties. Now, I've been looking at the feedback, this anonymous feedback that some of you have submitted. And one of the points that comes up in the feedback is that some of you are finding that the lectures are going a bit fast for you. Since this is an online lecture, I don't really get to see you guys. And so I have no way of knowing whether I'm going too fast or too slow, and adjust my pace accordingly. If it was a classroom teaching, then I would be able to see your faces, and if I'm going too fast, I could see your eyes glazing over, and so then I would know that I need to slow down. And if I'm going too slow, also your eyes will glaze over because you're bored and you start feeling sleepy, and I know that I need to speed up. So, but unfortunately, in an online mode of lecture, there is no way for me to know this because I don't get to see you guys. So the only way to slow me down is to interrupt me and ask questions. If some point is not clear, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question. And that's the best way to to make sure you're keeping pace with the lecture. Also, when you ask questions, I get a feel for how much of the lecture is getting through to you, and that will allow me to adjust what I cover in a lecture accordingly. That said, there is a certain syllabus that we have to get through in the course. So too many interruptions can make it difficult to make sure we finish things on time. Nonetheless, if it is too fast, you can always try to slow me down a bit by asking questions. The other suggestion was to use Notability or some other app to create notes. And I looked into some of these. Turns out that now, most of these apps are not free. In particular, Notability is only available for the Mac operating system. And what I'm using here is a Windows machine. And so, unfortunately, I cannot use Notability. There are some other apps which are paid, and turns out they're quite expensive. So I'm still looking for another option. But until then, I've started creating notes in this way, and I'm putting them up for you. Um, I hope it's not too difficult to just download the file and open it in a browser. The SVG file will open on any browser. Okay. So just to recap what we discussed at the very end of the previous class, we were discussing about induced norms, and we particularly discussed this maximum column sum norm. Okay, and this is what I'm writing with 3 bars and a 1 next to it. And this is defined as the maximum column norm among all the columns in A, in the matrix A. Written in terms of the entries of the matrix, what you have to do is to take the sum of all the entries of a given column, okay, the magnitude entries of a given column, say the jth column, and look which column among all 1 to n columns gives you the largest value, and that's what we define to be the maximum column sum norm of the matrix A. And there are 2 ways to show that this is indeed a matrix norm. The first way is to go from first principles, start with the definition of the matrix norm and show that it satisfies the 4 properties we need for something to be a matrix norm, namely the non-negativity, positivity, homogeneity, triangle inequality, and submultiplicativity. That's 5 properties, but non-negativity and positivity are lumped as the first property. That is the first way. The second way is to show that this norm, whatever this function that we are writing here, is induced by some other vector norm. And so, in other words, what we want to show here, so the claim is that this norm is induced by the vector L1 norm. So we need to show that the whatever we've defined here is in fact equal to the maximum of the L1 norm of Ax over all vectors such that the L1 norm of x equals 1. There are multiple ways to show this, but here is one easy way. So if A1 to An are the columns of A, then clearly by definition the maximum column sum norm of A is the maximum among all 1 to n, I going from 1 to n, of the L1 norm of the ith column of A. Now, if you define a vector x1 to xn and you look at what norm of Ax L1 is, that is just expanding it out in terms of the columns. It is x1 A1 plus etc. up to xn An L1 norm. Then I use triangle inequality of the L1 norm. The L1 norm is a vector norm and therefore it satisfies triangle inequality, and I take the norm inside the summation. So I am left with, so I get a less than or equal to summation I equal to 1 to n, the L1 norm of xi ai. Xi here is just a scalar, so I can bring that out and write it as mod xi times the L1 norm of ai by the homogeneity property of the vector norm. And then I can further upper bound this by replacing all of these guys, norm ai L1, with the maximum value, which is the max 1 less than or equal to k less than or equal to n, the L1 norm of ak. Now this has no longer depends on I, so it can come right out of the summation, and the summation I equal to 1 to n mod of xi is nothing but the L1 norm of x times, so and then this quantity here is by definition the maximum column sum norm of the matrix A. So the upshot of all this is that if I'm trying to maximize the L1 norm of Ax subject to the L1 norm of x equals 1, I can upper bound that by the maximum column sum norm of the matrix A. So this we called as expression A. Then conversely, if you choose specific values of the vector x, specifically if I take Ek is the vector with zeros everywhere except a 1 in the kth position. Or you can also think of it as the kth column of the n cross n identity matrix. Then if I look at the maximum of this Ek is a vector which satisfies the constraint. The L1 norm of Ek is always equal to 1, as you can see from here. And so this maximum, where I'm looking across all possible vectors, that has to be at least equal to its value at one particular point, which is ek. And so if I substitute ek, then that will only pick off the kth column of A, and I'll be left with the L1 norm of ak. So the maximum over all x, such that L1 norm of x equals 1 of the L1 norm of ax is at least equal to the L1 norm of ak for k equal to 1 to n. So since this is a lower bound for all k, it's of course, if I take the maximum of these numbers over all k from 1 to n, that will still be a lower bound because n is a finite number here. So we have that the maximum L1 norm of x equals 1 of the L1 norm of ax is at least equal to the maximum of the L1 norm of the columns of A, which again by definition is the maximum column sum norm of the matrix A. So this is what we called inequality B. So what have we shown? We've shown that this maximum value, whatever this is at least equal to the L1 norm of A and at most equal to the L1 norm of A. So if that is the case, then it must mean that the maximum of this, the L1 norm of AX subject to L1 norm of x equals 1 must be equal to the maximum column sum norm of the matrix A. And thus this norm that we just defined is indeed induced by the vector L1 norm. And therefore AL1 is a matrix norm. Okay, so the exercise that I closed the previous lecture with was to show from definition that this L1 norm of A, the maximum column norm, sum norm of A, is indeed a matrix norm. Okay, so now we'll continue with a couple of more examples. This is the maximum row sum norm. So this is very similar to the maximum column sum norm, except that instead of taking the L1 norms of the columns of A, we'll now take the L1 norms of the rows of A. So if we write A infinity, so I'm fixing an I, so that's fixing a particular row of the matrix, and I'm taking the L1 norm of all the entries in that row, and then I'm looking for which row from among the rows 1 to n gives me the biggest value, and that's what I'm defining to be A infinity. You can see that this is actually equal to the maximum column sum norm of A transpose. So by that itself, you can see that this is matrix norm, but it is also induced by the vector L1 norm. By the vector L infinity norm. And therefore it is a matrix norm. Showing this is very similar to the column sum norm, so I won't do that here, but we'll just move on directly to the next norm, which is the spectral norm. The spectral norm is by far the most important norm that we will look at in this course, and we write it like this, and it's defined as the A2 is equal to the maximum square root of lambda such that, or the value lambda is an eigenvalue of, I'll write it for the complex case, but of course if it's real, this Hermitian would be replaced by transpose, but it's A Hermitian A. So we haven't formally discussed eigenvalues, but unfortunately for these, for many of these results, we will need the notion of eigenvalues. But we'll connect all of these together later in the course when we discuss eigenvalues also. So basically, lambda is a quantity that satisfies A Hermitian Ax equals lambda x for some x not equal to 0. And so one thing to note here immediately is that if I pre-multiply this by x Hermitian, I have x Hermitian A Hermitian Ax is equal to, lambda is just a scalar, so I can pull that out and write it as lambda x Hermitian x. Okay, and this quantity x Hermitian A Hermitian Ax is actually equal to the L2 norm of Ax square. So we have seen that already, that if I have a vector y, y2 squared is equal to y Hermitian y. This is another way to write it's just the sum of the magnitude squares of all the entries of y, but we can also write that as y Hermitian y. And so this is, so therefore this quantity is real and positive, and this quantity is also real and actually non-negative. So both these are real and non-negative, and so you cannot suddenly have lambda being a complex number. And in fact, since both are real and non-negative, and in fact, since x is not equal to 0, this is strictly greater than 0, and this is greater than or equal to 0, which implies that lambda is always non-negative. So basically, square root of lambda is always real and non-negative. Okay. Now this particular norm is in fact induced by the vector L2 norm, so that a L2 square is actually equal to the max over all x L2 equals 1 of Ax L2 square. Okay. So this is the spectral norm. So these are the three examples I wanted to discuss about induced norms. So the maximum column sum norm, the maximum row sum norm, and the spectral norm. We'll discuss the spectral norm more later, but first, before that, recall that for vector norms, we know that if you're given a norm and a non-singular matrix, if you define a new norm to be the norm of, okay, so let me just write that. We've seen this property before. If is a vector norm and A is non-singular, then sorry. If I define this to be the vector norm of Ax, then this is a vector norm also. So basically, given if we know of a particular vector norm, then given any non-singular matrix, we can define a new vector norm. Similar, there's a similar result for matrix norms. So we have this theorem. If is a matrix norm on the space of n cross n matrices, and if S is non-singular, then if I define AS to be the matrix norm of S inverse AS for any A in C to the n cross n, this quantity AS is a matrix norm. Okay. So this quantity S inverse AS is what is called a similarity transform on the matrix A, and it has lots of very nice properties which we will actually study in quite detail later on. But for now, we're just observing that if you're given a matrix norm and any non-singular matrix, you can define a new matrix norm using that non-singular matrix. So how do you show this? The proof is very simple. Of course, the properties like homogeneity, non-negativity, positivity, and triangle inequality directly follow from the properties of this matrix norm here. And so the only interesting thing we need to show is the submultiplicativity. So for example, I mean, just to make my point, so if you take A plus B, and then you're looking at this S norm, this is equal to the matrix norm of S inverse A plus B times S, which is equal to the matrix norm of, I can take this S and S inverse inside the brackets so that it's S inverse AS plus S inverse BS, which now this is a matrix norm, so it will satisfy the triangle inequality, and I can write it as S inverse AS plus S inverse BS, which is actually equal to the S norm of A plus the S norm of B. So it satisfies triangle inequality. So how about the submultiplicativity? That's also very easy. So if I look at AB S norm, then that is equal to the matrix norm of S inverse ABS. And I can just insert an S inverse in between here because S inverse is just the identity matrix. So this is equal to S inverse AS, S inverse BS. Now I use the fact that this is a matrix norm, and so it satisfies the submultiplicativity property. So it's less than or equal to S inverse AS times the matrix norm of S inverse BS, which is nothing but the S norm of A times the S norm of B. Okay. So we now know several ways of coming up with different matrix norms. One way is you start with any vector norm that you know and then look at the induced norm. The other way is start with any matrix norm you know and consider a convenient non-singular matrix, and then you do S inverse AS and take the norm of that, and that becomes a new norm. So there's a great richness in the types of a number of different types of norms that you can construct. So to continue, now I want to discuss a new object which is called, yeah, go ahead please.
Sir, the triangle inequality for matrix norm, how does it hold? It was not mentioned in the properties of.
Matrix norms satisfy triangle inequality. That is the definition of a matrix norm. A matrix norm must satisfy non-negativity, positivity, homogeneity, triangle inequality, and submultiplicativity.
Oh, okay.
So basically, a matrix norm satisfies all the properties of the vector norm. In addition, it needs to satisfy one extra property, which is that of submultiplicativity. Okay, so the spectral radius. Rho of A of a matrix is rho of A is the maximum mod lambda such that lambda is an eigenvalue of A. Okay, so this is the definition. So given a matrix A, you find all the eigenvalues of the matrix, and then you ask which eigenvalue has the largest magnitude, and that value is called the spectral radius of a matrix A. So has anybody seen or dealt with the spectral radius before? Or is this a completely new concept that nobody has even heard of till today?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's a completely new concept, or yes, you have.
It's a new concept. It's a new concept.
Totally new
concept. Okay.
New concepts.
New concept.
Sorry. Say that again, please.
It's a new concept.
Okay. I see several hands up, so I'll very quickly call out. Vishwandhai Reddy Yannam.
Sir, it's a new concept, sir.
Okay. Nitin Gupta.
Yes, sir. New concept for me also.
Ankita.
Yes, sir. New concept for me also.
Okay. Ankit Kumar.
New concept, sir.
Navneet.
Sir, I lowered my hand. It's not updated.
Can you speak up a bit, please?
Sir, it's new. I have not studied it.
It's new for you also?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Sanjana?
Same, sir. New concept.
Okay. Anurag?
Sir, it is new to me, sir. I don't know about it.
Okay. Anand?
Sir, it's new to me. Sorry, I don't know about it.
Okay. Alok?
New to me, sir. It's also new to me.
Ashi? Ramya Kusuma?
Sir, it is a new concept to me, sir.
Okay. Abhijit?
It's new, sir.
Okay. Dhruv?
New concept for me, sir.
Okay, very good. So it looks like it's new for quite a lot of you, but this spectral radius is a fascinating object. It has lots of very interesting properties. I'll tell you one to begin with, and so it has the following universality property. So suppose lambda is an eigenvalue of the matrix A. So what that means is that mod of lambda is going to be less than or equal to rho of A, because rho of A is the largest magnitude eigenvalue, and there is at least one eigenvector corresponding to lambda. So suppose there is and there exists at least one eigenvector corresponding to an eigenvalue with magnitude rho of A. Okay, so now of course there's also an eigenvector corresponding to lambda, but I'm interested in the eigenvector corresponding to the eigenvalue whose whose magnitude is rho of A. Yeah, is there a question?
Yes, sir. Sir, what if lambda is imaginary?
Lambda can be complex valued, no problem.
Still there will be eigenvector.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah. So the point is that given any n cross n matrix, it will always have n eigenvalues. Some of these may be real valued, some of them may be complex valued. So since complex numbers are a generalization of real numbers, we can say that any n cross n matrix will have n complex valued eigenvalues. Some of these eigenvalues may be repeated. Now corresponding to, we'll see this later, but corresponding to every distinct eigenvalue, there will always be at least one eigenvector. When eigenvalues are repeated, it's possible that you cannot find, when I say distinct, I mean a linearly independent eigenvector. So in other words, an n cross n matrix will always have n complex eigenvalues, but it may not have n linearly independent eigenvectors. But corresponding to every eigenvalue, every distinct eigenvalue, there's always at least one eigenvector, because by definition, an eigenvalue-eigenvector pair satisfies the equation Ax equals lambda x. And so if you can't find an x such that Ax equals lambda x, then that cannot be an eigenvalue of the matrix. So basically, since rho of A is the maximum magnitude eigenvalue, if I consider that particular eigenvalue that gave me rho of A, there is a vector x such that so if I consider, so let's say consider.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, based upon the definition you gave, will it be the interpretation like this that the spectral radius defines the capability of matrix A to the maximum amplification it can give to a vector X?
That is correct.
Okay, sir.
But it's something that you have to prove. So, and when you say amplification, you have to also keep in mind, when you say amplification, in what sense? Okay, what property of the vector x are you thinking of getting amplified? Okay, so for example,
direction of x will not be changed. In the same direction, amplification should be considered.
That is true. That is true for any eigenvector of A. Okay, that is true for any eigenvector of A, not necessarily, not only for the eigenvector corresponding to the eigenvalue whose magnitude is rho of A.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you are thinking about, so you made a statement, you said that the rho of A is the maximum amplification that a vector can experience when it is multiplied by A. So in other words, in your mind, what you're thinking of is that the vector x has a certain size or length. Okay, you measure it using some, typically you want to measure it with the notion of a norm. Okay, so for some particular norm, the vector x has some value. And then you look at the norm of ax and you see how much bigger the norm of ax is compared to the norm of x. In other words, you're looking at the ratio norm of ax divided by norm of x. And you're saying that the maximum value this can take, norm of ax divided by norm of x, the maximum value it can take is rho of A. So that is correct, but it's important that to keep in mind that this is measured in terms of the Euclidean norm. It's only when you measure it in the Euclidean norm that the largest possible value of norm of ax divided by norm of x is going to be rho of A. Okay, so now let me just continue with this argument here. So suppose I consider this the particular eigenvector corresponding to rho of A. Okay, so there is some lambda corresponding to rho of A, and corresponding to that eigenvalue, there is an eigenvector x, and that satisfies Ax equals lambda x. Now I'll consider a matrix X, which is of size n cross n, and whose columns are all equal to x. So I just repeat this. Then what I'll do is, and note that Ax is equal to the same scalar lambda times the matrix X. That's because each of these columns are multiplying A, and then when you multiply this column with A, it will become equal to lambda times that column, and then every column gets multiplied by lambda. You can pull that right out of the matrix, and you will have lambda times X. Now, so if you're given any matrix norm is a matrix norm, then if I consider mod lambda times matrix norm of this X, this is equal to the matrix norm of lambda x. This is just by homogeneity, but lambda x is equal to Ax. And then by submultiplicativity, this is less than or equal to the norm of A times the norm of x. Now x is non-zero, and therefore the matrix norm of this matrix capital X is always going to be non-zero. So if I compare this last step with this first step, I can simply cancel out the matrix norm of X, and I have the conclusion that norm of A is greater than or equal to mod of lambda, which is rho of A. Okay, so this is a fascinating property. So we defined rho of A to be the largest magnitude eigenvector of eigenvalue of the matrix A, and it turns out that rho of A is a lower bound on any matrix norm you can define on A. So however you define the matrix norm, it can never give you a value which is less than this spectral radius of A. So I'll write that out because it's a very, very interesting and fascinating result. If is any matrix norm and if A is in C to the n cross n, then rho of A is less than or equal to the norm of A. So a natural question you can ask is, okay, rho of A is the maximum magnitude of all the eigenvalues. So basically it maps an n cross n matrix to a non-negative number. And so is rho of A matrix norm?
Excuse me, sir.
Hmm?
I have doubts.
Yes.
Sir, in the above expression, you have written lambda, mod of lambda is less than or equal to mod of A into, like, matrix norm of A into matrix norm of X, right? Then, then how did you conclude from here to next step? Is it for all lambda above expression?
No, no. This is for, so I wrote that here. Mod lambda is rho of A.
Okay, okay, okay. Only for that particular lambda. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So I'm considering the eigenvector corresponding to the eigenvalue whose magnitude equals rho of A.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Of course, the other eigenvalues in the matrix A have a magnitude less than or equal to rho of A. So the norm of A is actually going to be greater than or equal to the magnitude of any eigenvalue of the matrix A, and in particular it will be greater than or norm of A is greater than or equal to the maximum magnitude eigenvalue of A, which is rho of A.
It's like tighter bond, right? This is tighter bond than tighter lower bound.
It's a lower bound on, so rho of A is basically a lower bound on any matrix norm.
Yes, yes, yeah, I got it.
Okay, so rho of A is not a matrix norm. Okay, in fact, it is not even a vector norm. On C to the n square. Okay, you can show this, it's not difficult. But it is a lower bound on any for any norm of A. Okay, of course, I can always say, if I want a lower bound on norm, I can always say a lower bound on the norm of A is norm of A greater than or equal to 0. It's a non-negative, it's the non-negativity property of the matrix norm. But that is a trivial lower bound, it's not very interesting. But norm of A greater than or equal to rho of A is a very non-trivial lower bound. So that is the property of this rho of A. Now, it turns out that although rho of A cannot be a matrix norm, it is it is actually it is the biggest lower bound you can find, but rho of A is the greatest lower bound values of all matrix norms. Okay, what do I mean by this? So we just discussed that norm of A is greater than or equal to rho of A. So pick any norm. The value of that norm of A is going to be at least equal to rho of A. So I found one lower bound on norm of A. You can ask, can I come up with a different, a bigger lower bound on norm of A? That is, instead of rho of A, think of maybe you can find some other function. So, and write an inequality that this is greater than or equal to some other function zeta of A. Okay, and then what is this zeta? Okay, and this zeta of A is greater than or equal to rho of A. Can you find such a function as something that is an even better lower bound on any matrix norm you can define on A? The key thing is it has to hold for every possible matrix norm you may choose to define on the matrix A. Okay, even ones that we have not yet discussed and we have not, that maybe people haven't yet discovered. Can you find a bigger lower bound? The answer turns out to be no. So rho of A is in fact the greatest lower bound you can find that will hold for all matrix norms of A. Okay, that is what we will show next.
Sir?
Yep.
Sir, I didn't get the concept of how it's amplification that a matrix can give.
So that's a side point. We'll come back to that later. Essentially, we were discussing about if you look at norm of AX and then you divide that by norm of X. Okay, this is in one way you can define this to be what is the amplification that X is experiencing when it is multiplied by A. Okay, and the spectral radius is the largest such amplification you can get.
So is this same spectral norm only?
Spectral radius and spectral norm are two completely different things. So if I go up here.
Sir, actually my apprehension was that it requires it to be in same direction. What if there is another vector that is rotated but has still greater amplification by A?
So I think you'll need to spend a little time thinking about it, whether this is possible or not. So first of all, let me maybe make one small point that there is many more things we have to discuss before I can properly answer this question. And if I start discussing those, we will just completely leave the point here. So, but the only point I want to make right now in terms of clarifying this is that the spectral norm, okay, is defined like this. It's the maximum root lambda where lambda is an eigenvalue of A Hermitian A. Whereas the spectral radius is the maximum mod lambda where lambda is an eigenvalue of A itself. Okay, it turns out, it's a good point you make, because it's what is interesting here is that these two are very different objects. The spectral norm is a matrix norm. Okay, whereas the spectral radius is not a matrix norm. Okay, so now let's just compare these two. So keep this in mind. Norm A2 is the max root lambda where lambda is an eigenvalue of A Hermitian A. And in fact, we can show something like this.
Yeah.
The square of this is equal to I have to look at the largest value of AX square subject to X2 equal to 1. Whereas the spectral radius is rho of A is the maximum mod lambda where lambda is an eigenvalue of A. Okay. So these are two different objects.
Sir, isn't that definition the induced by L2 norm that we have for spectral norm? Isn't that saying that this is the maximum amplification that we can get in terms of Euclidean norm?
Yes. So they're both related. And if you're looking at a quantity like right, what you can show is that this quantity is actually equal to X transpose A transpose AX, and this you can show is less than or equal to this norm of not 4 bars okay. So yeah, I think your point is basically that when you're talking about amplification to this norm of X, you should really be comparing this. You should be looking at, when you're looking at AX L2, this is actually equal to square root of AX L2 squared, which is equal to square root of X transpose A transpose AX. And so it is actually more related to the spectral norm than to the spectral radius. However, we will see the connection between these two more closely in a few classes. Okay. Let me get rid of this. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, sir. I think it's more related to spectral norm, but in general, that is true for spectral radius.
Yeah. Yeah.
With respect to any norm.
Correct. So later we'll actually explicitly discuss these kind of amplification concepts when we discuss this thing known as the Rayleigh quotient. And in fact, that can be used to derive an algorithm to find the eigenvalues of a matrix, which is a different algorithm compared to finding the characteristic polynomial and trying to solve for the zeros of the characteristic polynomial. So we'll discuss that more later. But right now I want to say that rho of A is a lower bound on the on any norm on the matrix. You may choose to define on the matrix A, and in fact you cannot find a better lower bound. This is the greatest lower bound, and that is because of the following lemma. Let A be a matrix of size n cross n, and epsilon be some number, small number, which is strictly greater than 0. Then there is a matrix norm such that rho of A is less than or equal to this matrix norm of A. So this matrix norm I'm going to denote by these 3 bars is less than or equal to rho of A plus epsilon. Okay, so what is this saying? It's saying that no matter how small an epsilon you choose, I will be able to find a matrix norm such that the matrix norm of this particular matrix A is between rho of A and rho of A plus epsilon. In other words, you cannot find a different lower bound which will work for all A's and all norms. Okay, so maybe I'll write that here. So it works for all A and for all norms. Okay, so you won't be able to find another norm, another lower bound which is actually bigger than this rho of A. I can define a norm such that the norm of A is as close to this row of A as I wish. That is what this lemma is saying. So how do we show this? The proof actually uses one result that we're going to again show later, which I'll state here, but you have to take it on faith for now, but we'll prove it later on. It uses a result called the Schur triangularization theorem. What this says is that given A, of size n cross n with eigenvalues lambda 1 through lambda n, then there exists a unitary matrix U, which is of size n cross n, such that A is equal to U Hermitian delta U, where delta is an upper triangular matrix with diagonal entries delta II equal to lambda I. Okay, so this is the result that we will use. Okay, any matrix, any n cross n matrix can be decomposed as U Hermitian delta U, where U is a unitary matrix and delta is upper triangular with the eigenvalues along its diagonal. Okay, so now let's set dt to be the matrix, a diagonal matrix with t squared up to t to the n along the diagonal and zeros everywhere else. Okay, and then if you compute dt delta dt inverse, you can try a simple 2 cross 2 example to convince yourself that this is true, but you can show that this is equal to lambda 1, then t inverse delta 1 2, t to the minus 2 delta 1 3, up to t to the minus of n minus 1 delta 1 n, 0, lambda 2, t inverse delta 2 3, etc. And so all the diagonal entries will remain the same. I'll get lambda n down here, and I'll have t inverse delta n minus 1 comma n down here. Okay, and all these are zeros, and subdiagonal you have zeros everywhere. Okay, this is what happens if you take dt delta dt inverse, where dt is this diagonal matrix and delta is an upper triangular matrix. So basically, if I choose t to be a very large number, I can make all the off diagonal entries as small as I wish. So for large enough t, we can ensure that the sum of the absolute values of all off diagonal terms is less than or equal to epsilon. So that means that this, if I look at dt delta dt inverse. The one norm is going to be less than or equal to rho of A plus epsilon. I think I'm out of time. There is actually a couple of more steps, and I don't want to rush this last part of the proof. And so it will take me maybe 3 or 4 minutes, and I don't want you guys to feel like I rushed through this proof. So I'll just say to be continued. So a fun exercise for you could be to see if you can actually show that norm of A is less than or rather. So ultimately what we want to show is that rho of A is less than or equal to, for this particular. So okay, let me do this. I'll just say one thing here. We'll define the norm. So we want to define a norm such that the norm of A is between rho of A and rho of A plus epsilon, and we're going to define it to be the L1 norm of dt u b u Hermitian dt inverse. So this is using that S inverse AS form. So if I define it like this, it turns out that for this particular norm, rho of A is less than or equal to A is less than or equal to rho of A plus epsilon. So this is what we want to show, but we will continue this and show it a little more slowly in the next class. That's it for today. Please ask if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you again on Wednesday.